We'll wait just a few seconds for folks to finish joining us. Okay, so with respect to time, welcome everyone. We hope you all enjoyed a nice holiday weekend filled with your favorite Thanksgiving treats. Today, we're so excited to be back and to hear from the PCRC's very own Dr. Jean Kutner to learn about building a research shop, specifically managing people and projects. Just a few housekeeping items. Attendees cannot be, the video cannot be turned on and all attendees are muted. We wish for you to engage with us by entering your thoughts in the chat and your questions in the Q&A feature, which is a button at the bottom of your screen. And we also have a second PCRC co-chair with us today, Dr. Christine Ritchie. So now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Ritchie and ask that she please formally introduce Dr. Kutner.
Well, it brings me great joy to introduce Dr. Jean Kutner, who is a professor of medicine in the Division of General Internal Medicine and Geriatric Medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. She's also the Chief Medical Officer of the University of Colorado Hospital and Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs. That's just part of her day job. She also co-chairs, as you know, our NIH-funded PCRC and is a member of the NIH Nursing and Related Clinical Sciences Studies section, and also has been on the Institute of Medicine Transforming End of Life Committee. She's the past president of the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, and as if that wasn't enough, she's also past president of the Society of General Internal Medicine. She plays a very important role on the advisory board for the Cambria Sojourn Scholars Program, and has really played an incredibly important role for palliative medicine and palliative medicine research over many, many years, and has been a true pillar of light, I would say, in our field. She's also an amazingly fun person and a great friend, and so glad to learn from her today. Thank you, Jean.
Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you all for joining today. I know that coming back after a bit of a holiday week can be a little disorienting, so I appreciate people taking the time to join us today. So yes, I will be talking about this this idea of building research infrastructure, really building a research shop, and this idea that, you know, as we progress in our research careers, you know, we start out maybe with pilot grants, we get a career development award, then, you know, if we get a larger award for a particular study. And a lot of that work is particular study focus. And depending on how you are envisioning building your career, at some point you might want to be thinking beyond study to study and look getting funding and doing one study and then a next study and then a next study, and really building, you know, what I've affectionately called a research shop, or more, it'd be sort of the equivalent of our basic science friends that, you know, build a research lab and keep that entity going over many years. So I want to talk a little bit about potential approaches to that for those of you that are thinking about that's the way that you'd like to go. And in order to do that, you really need to be leveraging multiple projects over time, as well as you're managing people. And those are the sort of things I wanted to talk about today. And some of it is the realization that as soon as you get your first grant, you are actually running a small business. And it's one of those things that we don't get taught well along the way. We get taught research methodology and et cetera, but suddenly you're managing budgets, you're managing people, you have to think to the future. And it's kind of a skill set that we just are not necessarily taught along the way, and many of us kind of sort of self-taught it. As context for this and sort of my hard knocks learning along the way, this builds on my experience initially building what was the population-based palliative care research network, or popcorn, which started actually very early in my career. And the whole idea behind this was to build a network. At the time, we were focused primarily on hospices. We were using the model of the community-based primary care research networks, where most of the research was done in the community. The idea here, and especially at the time, was that most palliative and end-of-life care at that time, I'm dating myself, but was done in the community in hospice-based settings. So learning how to develop this really research lab and to keep then a series of studies going in that research lab. And then that evolved then into the PCRC, which of course you are all familiar with, which has been a labor of love from a number of us over the years. And it has us then regularly thinking about all these things. How do we manage multiple projects? How do we manage budgets over time and across multiple projects? And then, of course, managing the people. So that's just sort of the background of from some of this, I would say, kind of hard knocks learning that I think I and probably Christine and Catherine could tell similar stories. But if we start with the building a research shop, this, and as I said at the beginning, this is very individual as to whether, is this what you want to do? Is this your passion? There's not one, right career path as an investigator, but there's many advantages to really building out a research lab shop or a research lab. And what my advice on that is to start with your why. Why is it that you want to do this? Because it's like many things we do, it's hard work. And if you don't have the passion for it, then then it's just hard work and it's not fulfilling your passion. So thinking about what is your personal why, about why it is that you would want to build out this research shop or this program of research. So for me personally, my whys are my clinical experiences, which actually date back to medical school, and seeing that there had to be a better way to care for people with serious illness. And I'm still clinically active. And even though we've gotten much better, I think every time that I'm on clinical service, there's probably more research questions that pop into my head about why is it that we don't have evidence to support or to figure out what the best way approach is. It's also relevant to my my administrative roles. Why is it that I don't have evidence as to the best models of care? So some of that is my why, is my clinical experiences. And then my other why, like many people, are personal experiences. This is my mom. My mom died of Parkinson's in 2014. This picture was probably taken about probably 4 to 5 years before she died. And my clinical whys were definitely driven by my personal whys in realizing that even at that time, so 2014 when she died, which was sort of the grand irony that I was on the Institute of Medicine working group at that point, and we were writing what is best, palliative end of life care look like, and realizing that still the only way to do that, to really get an excellent last few years of life, is to have a doctor-daughter who's a palliative care physician or a palliative care nurse or somebody who's in the know. So that continues to be one of my personal whys, that we did a good job with my mom, but the only reason is because I was in the position that I was. And that's not meant to be egocentric. It's just that I can push things along in a way that, it's still hard for people to access. So anyway, those are my whys. So my charge to you is to then channel that passion into making a difference. And people can make differences in multiple different ways. So as you think about your program of research, is to make sure that you have developed what is your mission, what is your vision, what is it that you are trying to accomplish. And that has driven that drove starting popcorn. It drove starting the PCRC. My vision has changed a bit over time, but it's always come back to that, doing things that will actually drive toward improvements in care and making sure that you know what your personal vision is, because that's going to help you decide what path to take, because there's going to be multiple opportunities along the way. So as you think about developing your vision for this research shop, which, like I said, it may be different from where you started, but what is your vision for this research shop? What is it you want that this program of research, this research shop to achieve? Describe that envisioned future. Get this written down. You want it to inspire you. You want it to inspire your team, as well as create that sense of commitment and understanding. So you can say, this is what we are about in terms of our focus for our research shop. And then also develop a mission. So what this should be is more of a concise statement of what is that strategy? How is it that you're going to achieve this vision that you set out? Fit with your vision. Make sure that it's written in such a way that resonates with whoever your customer is, whether it's funders, philanthropy, your institution, whoever it is that you're selling this dream to. But this should lay out what is it that you do, how do you do it, and for whom do you do it. And this is something that you can do for yourself personally as well as for your program. So this is something that we did early on with the PCRC. We did end up evolving it a little bit over time, but it's always come back to this same basic vision that in order to provide excellent palliative care, we've got to have evidence to inform that care. And our role, and here's, this is our role as the PCRC. So this was, excuse me, our vision that we set out and that we put prominently on our website, and as we are considering what it is that we do as the PCRC. Excuse me one sec. And then we also set out our mission, and you see that this is more the strategies that we take to achieve that vision. So this is what the PCRC actually does. It supports investigators, supports the conduct of research, and provides those resources to support the conduct of research. So figuring out what your passion is, and then getting that written out there as a clear mission and vision, I think, are the first steps in order to develop a successful research shop. And then there's the figuring out, how are you going to do that? And this may depend on what it is that you're trying to achieve, as well as your local context. So especially if you are seeking institutional support for what it is that you're seeking to develop, is really understand your own institution. What is its culture? What is its mission? What is its structure? How do things function within your own organization? And where are the strengths and weaknesses, so that you can figure out what it is that what it is that you want to develop fits within your institution, as well as what constitutes a win or a loss, whether it's for your section, your division, your department, your school, your institution, and for each of those key stakeholders. And like an example of this, I remember I talked to my dean at one point about whether we should develop in our place, things that are with a capital P program or a capital C center have to go a whole sort of approval process that goes through the school and the regions and all that. And I talked to my dean about whether it made sense to go through the approval process to create a center for palliative care research. And he asked me a really important question. He said, what would that allow you to do that you can't do right now? And it sort of put a pause for me. And and we actually decided at the time, we may be changing that now, but at the time, to not pursue this sort of capital C officially region approved center, because we realized that the amount of time and energy that it would take to go through that process would detract from us being actually able to do the work, and it wouldn't actually get me much that I didn't already have in terms of being able to do the work. So really understanding that local context, local rules, getting some of that insider's perspective on what does it make the most sense to develop where you are, or if you're seeking to change institutions, where you're negotiating with as well. And some of that is figuring out what already exists in your setting, where are there potential synergies, where's there potential collaboration, where can you move forward something that is important to your institution. One of the things that I think we run into at all of our institutions, particularly in palliative care research, is that question of, do we have a sufficient critical mass of investigators at our institution to actually build something like a center or a program, or are we more in that building stage where what I really need to be negotiating for is for more investigator recruits so that we can have that critical mass of investigators. And when you do that, then you have to be thinking about, what are we focusing on, a specific research theme, a specific program. So being really thoughtful about what is that area that you are actually going to sort of lay claim to and call your own, and figuring out how big is that scope, how big is that umbrella or sandbox in which you are defining this program. If we get too narrow, it may be sort of our own little focus interest. If we get too broad, it kind of dilutes then what, back to that mission and vision around what it is that you do and do not do. And it's really important, again, to define that. What is it that you do and what is it that you don't do? I know early on in the PCRC and along the way, we have had to define and say, this is within scope, this is not within scope, it's not our area of expertise, it's not where we want to, or it's not consistent with our mission and vision to be putting energy there. And that can be hard to do as well. I think I already talked about this, is really understanding that local context. So I'm going to move forward. And then there's putting together an operational plan. And I will say, with the caveat that even the best laid plans needing to also be aware of and open to changes in what that timeline and things that you may have set out. So you may set out a lovely plan of, if we're going to do this by this time, this by this time, and that may be, I need to get more investigators that have R01 level funding, and then once we get there, we're going to do this. Once we get there, we're going to do this. But having that set out so that you have clear goals and milestones toward what that eventual envisioned future is. That said, things can change. So I'll give you the example of the PCRC. So we met an initial planning meeting in February of 2010. And at that point, we had set out a 6-month timeline for putting together sort of operational procedures. How would we function as the PCRC? And then we said, well, then we'll look for funding once we have some of these details all laid out about what it is that we're going to do, how we're going to function, and all that. And then there was a funding opportunity announcement that came out, I think literally a couple weeks later, that had a deadline, I believe, of March of 2010. So it was a very quick turnaround. But we decided that the way that funding opportunity was written, it was so consistent with what we were trying to achieve that we threw our initial timeline out the window, wrote the grant, and sort of ended up building the PCRC on a different timeline than we had initially planned. And I think you have to be ready for those opportunities, because you never know when there may be a funding opportunity, a willing donor, your dean or somebody says, so what have you been up to? That you have to be ready to have that in your back pocket to be able to jump if such an opportunity comes your way. Ideally, what you do is as you build your research shop, again, you're thinking about this as if you're building a business. So what's the structure going to be? What does being a member of that research shop look like? Where are there faculty who can join us who have the similar passions? And then looking at what does success look like? What does success look like on a short-term basis? What does success look like on a longer term basis, so that you can then show what are we actually accomplishing as that research shop. So that's the kind of like getting to it. And ideally, what you can do is develop a program or negotiate for, I guess if you're changing institutions, but develop a program that leverages what the local strengths are, fills in gaps that are not there, ideally aligned with funding mechanisms and things that are rewarded by your institution. And then it has to come back to your own passions and making sure that it's moving forward those things that are important to you. Okay, so that's the sort of background of getting ready. So what are ways that you can get ready and thinking about multiple projects over time? Because we start with the sort of one project, so it's sort of really sequential thinking, and then you realize at some point, especially after you get off of your career development award, that to be able to support an ongoing, focus research in a research program type approach, you really need to have multiple projects going simultaneously and have those projects be at different stages of development. You can't have every project being, startup, do the study, write it up in that sort of same manner, because that's not a sustainable approach to having multiple funding sources over time. So I know we all worry that we're going to run out of ideas, or at least I do. Maybe I'm the only one that ever has that worry, but I've heard that from other people too. So always keeping that running list of investigative ideas, and they don't always have to be yours. This is the fun part of having collaborative research relationships, is working with your research team or your collaborators, either at your own institution or at other institution, to always have that sort of ongoing log of new and creative ideas, and they can be building off of your existing work or even new directions. And this is why to engage with other investigators, as well as to why do you go to meetings, why to come to the PCRC annual meeting, is that you're hearing somebody present about research and say, oh, what about this? I would say though, as you're thinking about building on your own program of research, is back to that vision statement, it has to all at least hang together in some way, so that as you are writing your research grants, you can explain how those research ideas are building off of prior research and prior investigations. But really, I think to have a sustained program of research is always having several ideas in the hopper at various stages of development are really necessary to be able to keep this moving forward. There are a number of ways to do this. I think in palliative care, we are not as good as the folks in say, the basic science labs of doing these sort of continuation type grant applications. We sort of tend to do sort of one and done. Okay, done with that. Now on to the next. But thinking about it, are there ways that you can leverage your ongoing studies, especially if you're following a cohort over time, to have maybe a slightly new direction to the research, but that clearly builds on something that you have are already been doing, so you don't have to sort of start from scratch from the very beginning of the multiple years of developing an idea, getting the pilot studies. So thinking ahead on how can my current research then inform my next research studies, so that you're always have, like I said, something in development and something in the hopper. There are also important approaches to leveraging people. Our research teams are really what keep us going. Whether these are co-investigators or our clinical research coordinators, our project managers, etc. So having that cohesive group that you are regularly meeting with and learning from each other, generating ideas off of each other, and also in the ideal world, I think is thinking through with the multiple PI structure is sharing the research grants and sharing who's going to be the contact PI. So for example, Christine, Catherine, and I do this when we're writing grants. We have an explicit discussion of who's got the bandwidth, or whose grants management team at the time has the bandwidth to be able to be the contact PI for a study. And we rotate that around depending on who's got the time and the energy and the interest. And it makes it a fun way to write grants and to learn from each other and to bring in different perspectives and creative ideas. And I've seen some of this happen now with some of the PCRC SIGs or special interest groups too, where there's been people with similar research interests coming together to co-write grants. And I think it helps with that creativity and helps with having that sort of ongoing flow of ideas. Palliative care itself is by its very nature interdisciplinary. And I think, we regularly see in our grant reviews, one of the strengths of being an investigative team for multiple disciplines is it's easy then to justify what those different perspectives bring to that grant writing and to that investigation. And I think we've seen this with the PCRC as well as with other grants, that it's become a lot easier to also bring in investigators from multiple institutions. I will say though, in the third bullet on here, and you'll see this theme a few times, is that at some point you as the PI, if you're the contact PI, if it's a multiple PI study, or if you're the PI and you have co-investigators, that there will be differences of opinion. It happens among smart creative people, and at some point making it explicit of who has that final decisional authority, so that you can keep things moving forward. Bringing in consultants can also be helpful, and especially as you're building, say, a research shop, to have an advisory board that can then help you with some of that external sensing piece of it. How does this research shop, this research program fit in with either broader institutional initiatives or broader national initiatives? So for example, with the PCRC, we have a steering committee that really helps us make sure that we are moving forward within our notice of grant award and what we've been charged with doing. And then we have an external advisory board that helps us with that more external sensing of how what the PCRC is doing fits in with national initiatives outside of palliative care, actually, mostly. With my T32, we have an external advisory board that helps us thinking ahead in terms of ways that we can be more innovative in training our T32 awardees, and some strategic approaches as well. So if you think about your research, as you think about building your research shop and thinking about your research team, in sort of the idealized world, to have a research team that then works on multiple projects, I think can help with both efficiencies and continuity. I've been in the situation where I've had separate research projects with entirely separate research teams, and it becomes rather inefficient. So I think if you can think about that, defining that program of research and then pulling together that team. You may have people come in and out over time or have, ad hoc consultants, but having that research team that can address multiple projects over time can help with some of your time management as the principal investigator, and really builds those relationships over time as well. Then if you're thinking about grants, especially when you're writing grants with a team, very important up front to identify who are the critical contributors, and identifying that those critical contributors, specifying what their roles are, and then making sure that they have effort on the grant that match that role. I've seen, unfortunately, some situations where there have not been explicit discussions about that up front, and it becomes very either late in the grant writing process, or even worse, after the grant is awarded, and there is lack of clarity on roles and effort and expectations. So having those discussions up front among your key contributors on your grant is something I would highly recommend. As well as, especially if you are within an institution, or if people are within the same institution, is understanding what your institutional rules are around allocating the indirects. Here at University of Colorado, we can allocate indirects across divisions, across departments, when there are multiple contributors from different divisions or departments or schools even. But understanding how that works at your institution, so again, you don't have hard feelings on the back end. This question of whether to do multiple PI or co-investigator or consultant is a little bit of individual preference and a little bit of grantsmanship. So making sure that you're building your research team in such a way as one, it meets the needs of the grant, and two, it's going to make sense to your reviewers. And then being really clear on what those expectations is. If somebody is a multiple P on the grant, making sure that you're really clear on what the expectations are for that person. I mean, you have to write it out in the multiple PI plan, but probably even more important is making sure that you have a functioning team. I've seen people get into situations where maybe somebody is, quote, demanding to be a multiple PI, and the initiating PI doesn't think that it makes sense. Ultimately, you have to make the decision that is best for the study and that makes the most sense. And I know that we all try and navigate some of these difficult relationships, but having those discussions up front and making the decision that makes the most sense for that study is really what needs to be your sort of driving light on this. And then the whole idea of authorship when it's a team working on something, again, having these discussions up front, planning out what those papers are going to be from that project, and making it really clear up front what authorship's going to look like. It's helpful to have some guidelines in place. People are probably aware, but we do have on the PCRC website at palliativecareresearch.org, we do have the PCRC authorship guidelines that are pretty explicitly lay out how those decisions can be made. So again, something to have out there early on so that you avoid misunderstandings. So that's so far we've gone through knowing your own why, understanding your context, then then managing and directing and moving forward with your sort of overall program of research and how you're going to manage that investigative team. And then you realize that as a small business owner, you are now managing people as well. You've got your investigators as well as your research team, your CRCs, your research assistants, your program managers, whatever you call them in your setting. And the key here is hire well and engage people, treat them well, and keep them supported. But put the time and energy into hiring well. I think we've probably all made some mistakes somewhere along the way because we needed to fill a position and we just got somebody into a role that really, was not a good fit. So how do you find people? I always check with colleagues first. If somebody else has a member of their research team that is outstanding, that maybe has an upcoming funding gap, to be able to support somebody that already has, a demonstrated track record can be a good way to find people. Looking at your local universities, talking to your study staff. They may know people within their community. There is always this trade-off. And I've seen this discussed a lot, is that, sometimes the most sort of, highly qualified folks, you're only going to have for a year or two because they're on their way to some other professional career. They're on their way to grad school or something. And that's okay, as long as you know it up front so that you can plan for that in terms of planning for staff turnover. But when you do identify high quality staff, commit to keep them funded, keep them employed, find ways to have their career development. I fortunately have been fortunate enough to have a number of members of our research team who have been career research staff. And I found that is an important commitment to their own research development, career development as well. When you are selecting research staff, it's really important to define what skill sets do you actually need for this study. Is this a study where you need somebody who has people skills, who can be out there in the community? Is this somebody that you need to have had some clinical background? Are you actually hiring for a database person or an analyst? They're just like us, people have things that they are better or worse at, and knowing what that skill set that you need. If it's somebody has a skill gap, is that something that you can train to, or is it fundamental that they need to have at the time of hire? You want people who are attention to detail, people who learn quickly. I put on here typos on CV for me, or resume is an automatic exclusion. If they're making mistakes on their resume, imagine what they're going to do with your research data. References, always check references. Even if somebody seems amazing, you always check their references. This can be so valuable, just in understanding what people's skill sets are, how did they perform in that last role. And sometimes we're like, oh, they had this little negative, it's all right, I'm just going to ignore it. And I know, like I said, we're all, scrambling to fulfill our research team positions, but really pay attention to something that comes across as a negative, especially if you've called somebody for a reference, because most references will be pretty positive, but if you hear some negatives, I highly recommend diving deeper into that. So once you do have the good fortune of assembling your research team, we really need to pay attention to our team structure, the morale of our team. And this, I think, has become especially important as we've had more and more remote work over the last couple of years. So being clear of how do we function as a team among your research staff. We've had a number over the years with our research team. We've actually had a number of retreats where we've actually focused on how do we function as our team, what are our team expectations, what are our team culture. How do we communicate as a team? What's our meeting structure? I think it's something that we sort of kind of assume is going to happen, or at least I've made that mistake. And just as we would with, building any other kind of team, building a team structure and culture is so important, because this is really the team that's going to move forward your research, and to work closely with that team to identify how do they want to communicate, how do they problem solve. It really requires us as the principal investigators to be closely involved and engaged with our teams. And some of that may involve even laying out for your team, especially as you get a bigger, as you build this research shop, as you get a bigger and bigger research team, is identifying, who on your team has what strengths and weaknesses, who on your team enjoys doing one type of work or another, and dividing out the tasks of the research based on what people's strengths are. And that may need to change over time as the structure of your research team changes over time. And then depending on how big your research team gets, you may end up having more of an accountability structure where you may have, say, a senior research leader or a program manager or something who actually manages the rest of the team, but being, again, really clear on what those responsibilities are, and having, again, that clear communication and expectations with your team. I know it sounds kind of elemental, but I think it's something that, we just sometimes we sort of build or we hire and we get bigger and bigger, and we haven't paid that close attention to how our teams are functioning. And then in terms of the quality control for your research, remembering that you as the principal investigator are ultimately responsible. If there's a problem with the way that your data are being collected, or things are being tracked, or data are being entered, you are ultimately responsible. So setting up those clear expectations, having that clear training for your staff ahead of time, making sure that they actually are doing what is expected is ultimately our responsibility as the principal investigators, and tapping in to your data management team to make sure that there's not any irregularities in the quality of the data. And then as we would expect, also making sure that your research team is getting the feedback that they need, that they have those clear expectations, and then they are regularly getting that feedback that they need based on the performance goals that you have set out for them. Unfortunately, we've probably all been there, but we may have to at some point, maybe somebody's not working out, that we do need to let them go. My advice here is to work close, excuse me, work closely with your HR. One moment. Sorry. Work closely with your HR. Each of your institutions are going to have very sort of specific ways to help you with your staff, and just to help you decide, is this something that is coachable, or is this something that needs to follow HR processes? Probably the bigger mistake that most of us make is thinking that we can fix something that is really not fixable. And I've bet many of us have been in that situation where as hard as it is to let somebody go, you realize once you've done it that you probably should have done it a lot longer time ago than you actually did. So ideally, you can do this by finding a position that works better for that person, because it may just not be a good fit, but that is not always possible. But just as you've learned other skills, that learning how to manage people, which includes both encouraging them as well as, when necessary, finding other opportunities for them. It's been minute or so talking about data analysts. I don't know if there's any data analysts or statisticians on the call or watching this, but these are some excellent lessons that I learned from fabulous statisticians that I've worked with over time, is that bring our statisticians in as core members of our research team, and we need to plan early and plan ahead for our analyses, and make sure that we're moving things forward, make sure that we're funding our statisticians and our analysts sufficiently as we think about budget allocation. And this is definitely one where, working both within your own research shop and across divisions, departments, et cetera, to identify really strong statisticians and data analysts, and ideally work with them over time across projects so that you can develop that relationship and keep things moving forward and keep people funded. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on conflicts, because unfortunately conflicts do occur. It's sort of part of human nature, whether that's conflicts with your other principal investigators, conflicts with your co-investigators, conflicts within your research staff. It's going to happen. It's part of life, and I think many of us maybe are a little bit conflict adverse. It's just going to get worse. Don't ignore it, I think, is my bottom line here. If there are conflicts, address them early, address them directly. Depending on how severe it is, you may look into resources that you have at your institution, such as an ombuds office, to help assist with resolution, especially if there's a conflict between two people on your team. I will say that if you're saying, I really hate conflict, I really want to run away from it, speaking from personal experience, it does get easier over time. You get better at it. You may want to consider doing some coursework. I know most professional development offices at most institutions have some courses in conflict management, things like crucial conversations. As you're running your small business, otherwise known as your research shop, you're going to have to learn how to do this. So this is something that I would jump on, working on your skills earlier rather than later. I would like to emphasize the last bullet on this slide, that we always have to think of the best interests of the study and moving that forward. And sometimes that can mean making difficult decisions, especially around personnel. But we have to keep that work moving forward and assure, it's our obligation to the study participants, it's our obligation to our funders, that we, maintain the integrity of our research. So I'm going to wrap up by just thinking a little bit about this question of career development and personal professional satisfaction as you think about either building your own research shop or taking on other roles and responsibilities. And I think as we progress in our careers, we often struggle with this. Our roles as principal investigators on research, we also wear many other hats. We mentor, we may take on some administrative roles, we may serve as a co-investigator on projects, we may be fundraising for our research or our program, and we may get asked to do a lot of things and participate in a variety of things. And I guess coming back to where I started on what is your own personal passion and what brings meaning to you, and how do you feel like you can make the most difference in a meaningful way for you. There is no one right answer. For some people, they find fulfillment from being, fully NIH or other funding, and having all of their time focused on research, and would never want any administrative roles. For other people, they want to, develop a program and maybe over time do less research and be more in a research leadership type role or another role. And I guess I just encourage you as individuals to think about what brings you joy and where do you feel like you can make the most significant difference, and be honest with yourself about it, because like I said, there's no one right way to build a career as an investigator. So I'm going to end there, and with this Stephen Covey quote that reinforces this idea of tapping into your passion, and it makes what we do fun. So I think we'll move on to the Q&A, and I will also put up. I'm going to put up Naomi's last slide just to remind people. So, Christine.
Thanks, Jean. Always love hearing your reflections on these really important issues. And we do have a lot of questions for you, so maybe we can go ahead and go through some of those. One is, do you have a recommended project management software website that you find most helpful to manage multiple projects and team members?
I would say I don't personally. I guess I've used various approaches over time. I don't have a particular one. I do find using something that you can access from everywhere, I think it is key. If you have to necessarily be VPNing in, that can be hard. But I would say setting up a structure that works for you and your team. So we, like, for example, for the PCRC, we have used Box as our sort of, that's where we store all of our shared documents. And Naomi's gonna have to remind me, Airtable. That's what we use, a platform called Airtable for tracking projects over time, but I don't have a specific one. Naomi, you have anything to add to that?
Airtable is a really great tool, especially how we've used it for the PCRC, and I can speak for also the Center for Aging and Serious Illness at Mass General. We use Smartsheet, and that has been really successful across CRCs. We've built it into our training and onboarding, and so they've been able to pick it up really, really great, and we get automated reminders. It's a great system. Great, thanks, Naomi. And this is also a good example of tapping into expertise. I've had the good fortune, like I said, I've worked with Rachel Kendrick, who many of you know from the PCRC for many years now, and I rely on people like Naomi and Rachel to organize me, honestly. So yeah, so tapping into that expertise.
Awesome. And just so you know, there was a statistician in the crowd, Katie Colburn, so she was grateful for your shout out to statisticians. We had another attendee ask, how do you manage well-intentioned different opinions?
That happens. I think, and this is kind of actually a skill that probably cuts across clinical, it cuts across research, it cuts across administrative roles. I think we have to be good listeners first, and to understand, what is the why behind what somebody is offering. Do they have the full understanding of the picture? So I think being a good listener, that sort of seek first to understand, or asking those questions, help me understand. And I think then being able to articulate the why back, the sort of, thank you for sharing this opinion. And while I appreciate that opinion, that I'm not going that direction, and here's why. And I think that's that role as a principal investigator, that at some point, you have to make a call. I see this often actually more in people that are planning a career development award or junior investigators, that they may get differing opinions from their own mentors, and that still they ultimately need to be the final decision maker.
Yeah. Another question is, can you speak to, you had mentioned earlier about starting programs and centers at an institution, or having a negotiating position for potential position in another institution. Can you talk about at what point one's career one should start thinking about things like that, and what situations would be a ripe time to think about, running a program or a center, and are these typically funded in ways different from individual projects?
So I would say that the point in the career is, you have to have, sort of a bit of a track record. So, having, developed some research expertise, showing that you can actually have productivity from research funding. So completing projects, getting them funded. So I do think you need to have that kind of street cred as an investigator, and showing that you are productive. And then I think it is, where do you want this to go? And so I don't know that there is a necessarily a right time to do it, but it's having that vision of where do you see where this program of research is going to go. And then you can't build a center as a single investigator. You really need to have collaborators and people who can be co-investigators. It can't be all on you as the only one writing those grants. So I think that the time is when you're ready to collaborate. So after you've sort of done that proving yourself, and whether you're at your own institution or looking at another institution, what do the number of collaborators look like there? And am I trying to build a group of collaborators? Do I already have a group of collaborators that have some sort of aligned interests that we could then build into a program? And then it's going to be really understanding, like I said, that local culture, local environment. What does it mean to be a center? And yes, it is different funding. I would say most successful research centers have some combination of funding. Some's going to be NIH type funding, some is institutional commitment, some's going to be philanthropy. So thinking about also diversifying those funding sources, and recognizing that once you become a center director, some part of your time is going to be trying to figure out how to keep that thing funded on an ongoing basis. Because I'd love to hear what you say, Christine, but I would say most research centers do not have a guaranteed ongoing source of funding.
Yes, totally agree. It's a rare thing for a center to have ongoing funding and support. So Xiaowei has had her hand up, so maybe we can go to her next. Is Xiaowei still on? Maybe she had to jump off. Oh, there she is. Did you want to ask a question, Xiaowei?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I actually submitted my question already, and
Okay.
I think I accidentally clicked get too excited and raised my hand.
Okay, no worries, no worries. Well, in the spirit of wanting to end on time, we will probably stop here, but just say thank you for great questions, and thanks to Jean for an incredibly thoughtful and practical set of reflections on how to build a team and a research program. And Naomi, you have the final word.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kutner and Dr. Ritchie. You see on the slide 2 more webinars we have in our near future. So next up, we'll hear from our spirituality and religion SIG, co-led by Dr. George Fitchett, Alexia Torkey, and moderated by Dr. Shelley Varner-Perez. And they'll be chatting about making spiritual care a routine part of care for people with serious illness. Then we'll welcome you back in the new year to learn from Dr. Laura Hansen about choosing research outcomes for real world practice. And finally, we have released the call for applications for our annual PCRC Clinical Trials Intensive. Please do visit our website and consider applying by our January 13th deadline. Thank you so much, everyone. As always, please do complete our post survey, and thanks so much for attending. Take good care.